Welcome to the Business, Finance, and Comedy Show. I am a guy surrounded by money. Today I'm interviewing Mads Singers, who has a virtual assistant agency. How did you get started in that business?
Yeah, I have multiple companies, but the virtual assistant company, first and foremost, I started because I was doing a lot of management coaching. I saw a lot of companies trying to hire abroad, trying to outsource, and not doing so very successfully. So the key thing was really setting up a company in a way that really supported people both in finding great staff members, because a lot of the time people just see, quote, cheap labor, but they don't know how to evaluate it, or they don't necessarily know how to hire great people. So our core focus was really just hiring great people. And then following on from that was making sure that they then actually stick around with the client. So that was kind of helping the clients initially, um, make sure they were being managed well and so on. Because again, if you hire a great person, but you're not managing them very well or not giving them work that, make them feel good, then they often don't stick around for a long time. So that's been the focus.
What are the typical types of customers that you get?
So the customer's base is very broad. So our focus as a company is really our focus on recruitment. So we are very good at finding great people. That's kind of our niche, our repeatable process. So the kind of companies we work is very broad. Lots of SEO companies, lots of e-commerce companies, lots of SaaS tools company, but also working with many sort of traditional businesses. So we have certain manufacturers we do work for. So it's very broad across the spectrum, really.
How competitive is the VA market and how do you market your services?
That's a lot of companies in the space of VAs. What I would say is we're hiring predominantly in South Africa, and there's very few companies and very few companies doing that in general. So for us, that side of the market is not super competitive. Like when we look in Philippines and India and so on, there's millions of businesses, right? But we see South Africa as one of the ideal places to hire for many, many roles, just because they are very, like, it's native English for most people, and it's sort of more Western mindset. A lot of the time when people are managing people in Asia, they often struggle to understand them. And with South Africa, it's sort of Western mindset. So it kind of stands out a good bit comparable. So generally, obviously, there's competition in the space, but for what we're doing specifically hiring in South Africa, the competition is not super high.
How has the rise of artificial intelligence affected your business?
So far, AI haven't really affected our business. So I would say, again, we try and place valuable VAs, right? So, and obviously VAs is a broad term reality, as many people do very various different type of tasks, right? So we haven't really seen any negative or significantly positive impact so far of AI. I can definitely see it coming to some extent, right? I think particularly finding people who are able to prompt well, finding people who are able to do things with AI well, is a big potential. And I think there's definitely a lot of focus on that at the moment. But from a negative standpoint, I wouldn't say it have impacted our business so far.
Do you have a plan for handling future advances in this technology?
Yeah, I mean, we're constantly looking at how we can improve, right? So that includes customer acquisition. It definitely includes like how we can make sure that our staff is more productive, right? So obviously, if we can find tools that many of our VAs do customer service, for example. So if we have ways that we can help either the staff or the clients individually with improving their services, obviously that makes a ton of sense, and that's obviously something we want to do. So we're constantly looking at the sort of latest tech with AI, and we're consistently have a couple of people sort of looking at how we can use it to our benefit and implement it.
I once hired a cheap virtual assistant. She was just useless at everything, and I let her go within a week, and I did try my best to find something she could do, How do you ensure that your workers know what they are doing?
So the first thing is like recruitment. Doesn't matter if you're hiring in the US or in Europe or Australia or whatever. Like recruitment is always about finding great people. And this is one of the biggest things, as I mentioned earlier on. Like a lot of the time, people just they see cheap labor and they just think, wow, great. But just like when you hire someone in the US, you spend a significant amount of time interviewing a bunch of people, finding the right person. And that's very important. It's not, I mean, you can find people, and we have people right now who run businesses. Like we have VAs that have worked with clients for a period of time and is now the CEO of a company, right? Because they're so good. So the whole thing is that it's about finding great people at every step of the way. And that's what we do with our outsourcing company, right? Like it's not just about finding a person. So when you find a person, if they're not good, like if they don't know how to use a computer, if they don't know, like if they don't have the right personality for what you're giving them, then they're not going to succeed. And it's not just about hiring cheap labor. It's about hiring great people who have an idea of what it is you're doing and how you can actually utilize that, right?
How long do your workers generally stay?
So we have very, very low attrition. So I think last year we have over 300 some staff members. We had about 3% attrition. So we're counting it in years on average, right? So most of the time, honestly, if the if we stop working with a client with a particular VA, it's typically because they're redoing something different in their business, or sometimes a business doesn't do well and they go bankrupt or whatever. So it's definitely more frequently an issue with the company, not with the VA. So we have very, very few people leave in general.
What percentage of clients give the assistants their own standard operating procedures, and what are the best practices regarding this?
So I would say probably about 30 to 40% have specific SOPs or operating procedures for the specific task. One of the things that I spend a lot of time teaching people is how to give people ownership and responsibility instead of just handing them a SOP, right? So the difference between telling someone, hey, here's a pile of papers or here's an SOP, go look at it and just repeat it, right? And you're like, okay, I'll sit and press the button all day, every day. Um, like that versus telling someone, hey, I'm a CEO. I'm super busy. I need help dealing with our customer service. I've hired you because you're great at talking to people. I don't know, you have excellent computer skills. I want to make you responsible for our entire customer service. Here's a process of how we're doing it right now, but I want you to own this thing and then give people like some clear goals, right? Like, we want to answer every customer within 24 hours, and we want to make sure that we have a 95% happiness rating or whatever. Like setting people up and actually giving them ownership and responsibility makes it significantly more likely that you get a good result out of them, right? And that doesn't matter where in the world you hire people, but when you just give people an SOP and say, repeat this thing over and over for the rest of your life or for the next foreseeable future, like one, it's not very exciting. Two, it doesn't help people have ownership. And the most important is that business owners always come back and say, oh, these people are never suggesting improvements. And I'm like, they hardly know what they're doing. You gave them a thing that told them to follow these 10 steps. They're following those 10 steps. They don't know why they're doing it. They don't understand the concept. And therefore, they're not suggesting how to do it better. Right?
I have heard stories of virtual assistants screwing over their clients by inserting their own affiliate links, etc. What safeguards do you have regarding this?
From an SEO standpoint, well, I mean, this is not about virtual assistant. That could happen with anyone. Like if you hire someone in the US or Europe, honestly, it will be more likely to happen if you hire someone in Europe or the US or something, right? So, um, fundamentally, I don't know if there's a lot of particular safeguards. I go the other way around. I tend to trust people. Could it happen? Definitely, definitely. I think the simplest thing to do, and it depends a lot what you're doing with affiliate, right? So if you're doing a ton of stuff, like a ton of different affiliate programs and millions of links everywhere, I mean that could obviously be difficult to keep track on. If you're doing less links and you're using tools like some of our sites, for example, with our SEO company, we use like Print Links or something like that, where we maybe have 10 or 12 links, so it's relatively easy to go in and double check if those links are correct. But fundamentally, honestly, it's not something I would personally spend much time and energy on. If obviously if you see strange things, if you suddenly see your profits cut in half or your revenue cut in half because you're suddenly getting a lot less affiliate sales, I mean, yeah, maybe. But honestly, I think I've heard of one guy where it happened, but it's like one of these things where people avoid doing something because they have all these millions of reasons why not to do it, where reality is the likelihood of it happening is very slim. I mean, people can always screw you over. An employee can always screw you over. They can always find a way to steal from you, steal your IP, steal some of your customer information. Like if people really want, they can find a way to steal from you. But my experience is you're more likely for that to happen with a local employee in the US and Europe than you are with it happening from a VA standpoint.
What do you find are the main causes of conflict in contractor management, and how can business owners better deal with these issues?
Biggest issue is typically people not performing. And in most cases, this is because they're not being managed very well. So one of the key things is that a lot of time when people hire VAs or contractors in general, they treat them as cheap labor. And the problem is if you treat someone as cheap labor, they will only ever be cheap labor. But if you actually, and then the way I look at it is if someone works for you 40 hours a week or 30 hours or whatever, how much, I treat them as a full employee. I don't care. Like I'll treat them in the same way as if someone's sitting in my office next to me, right? Like it's not about the cost of the labor. It's about the fact that this is a resource for the business. And the big things for me is like you want to manage them like a regular employee. I don't care what a contractor status says. Like if someone is a contractor, a VA, a freelancer, like if they're working for me 40 hours a week, I absolutely make sure that I treat them as such, right? Which means I do one-to-ones with them on a weekly basis. They're part of team meetings. They're part of, they're part of the company, and I treat them like an employee. And I think that's one of the biggest things. I mean, I was coaching a client at one point, and he had a VA for 8 years, and the only way they had ever communicated was to Skype written chat, right? And I mean, he was okay with the result. I mean, it wasn't a great employee, but the thing is, if you don't spend time, if you don't spend effort on people, I mean, you're very unlikely to get good output. Like if you talk with most people who have ever had a day job, like if their boss never talked to them, like they're very unlikely to do a good job, right? So you need to talk to people, you need to communicate and so on. That's really important.
What kinds of things that your virtual assistants offer do you believe get the most bang for buck?
Typically the most bang for buck is where it's easiest to calculate is typically around lead generation and sales, right? Like obviously it's easy to see if someone generates you 3 leads that make you 10 grand. It's very easy to look at it, right? Obviously when you're looking at SEO, for example, like it can be hard to evaluate what is the value of a link someone built. So what is the value of some content someone writes, right? Like that can be a bit harder to evaluate straight away. I think fundamentally the key things are one, lead generation, two, generally saving time, right? Like I think I don't look at it at outsourcing as being cheap labor. I'm looking at how can you hire cost-effective, great people, and sometimes those are cheaper. But if you look at a country like South Africa, right? If you want to hire like a top 1% person in South Africa, and they're usually really damn good, right? Sometimes 3, 4, 5K a month can get you that. If you want to hire a top 1% person in the US, you're paying 20, 30, 40 grand a month, right? So the whole point is, for me, is outsourcing is not about hiring the cheapest people. It's about getting a great return on investment. And just like in the US, if you hire the absolute cheapest people, like people who are working at McDonald's or whatever, like you're hardly going to get great output, right? Now that's no different than if you go to the Philippines or something and hire the cheapest person that you can find, right? I mean, if they have a laptop that can hardly start and they have some dodgy internet because the salary doesn't actually allow them to have a decent computer and decent internet, like, yeah, you're not going to get like a tremendous output from them, right? So the whole thing is normally focused on making sure that you're actually focus on return of investment. So if you're looking to hire a person in your company, well, really look at, well, what's the number one thing this person can do that gives you great value? And then go out and look at, well, what are the sort of market rates for this, right? Like very often, if let's say you could hire a Filipino for $500 and you would get someone who wouldn't be super great. Now, if you went and paid $1,500 a month, and that's still way less than you could hire someone in the US for, right? You could maybe get someone who is absolutely exceptional and way better than any of the cheaper labor people that you could find in the US, right? So for me, that's the most effective way to use outsourcing. Recruiting people is about return of investment. It is not about cheap.
Are there any legal niches that you will not serve?
Generally, we haven't really worked. We've never had anyone ask us for something that we wouldn't serve. Oh, definitely scam, like call centers and stuff. Obviously, people trying to scam and be unethical or something like that, we wouldn't be involved in. We did have an Indian company at some point contact us to try and find people to do phone calls, and that was they basically ran a scam operation trying to fraud people with credit cards and stuff. So that obviously we were not interested in, but anything that's legal, we're generally happy to work with people.
Do you find that some people have unrealistic expectations of what a virtual assistant can do?
No, I find mostly that, so when you're dealing with humans, most humans have certain strengths and weaknesses. So if you're looking at web development, for example, like you rarely have an absolute amazing graphic designer who's also an amazing developer. Those two are naturally different human behaviors, and therefore it's rarely the same person who are absolutely great at both. And this is the same with many different skill sets, right? So one of the key things that I always recommend people to do is say, if you hire a person and if they can only do one thing, but do that one thing really well, what is that? So if you're hiring someone, figure out like what's the one thing that would make them worth their value and really push that, right? So if you're hiring a person and you'd like them to do 3 or 4 different things, really you want them to at least make their value on one of those things. And then making sure when you're recruiting that you're recruiting for that one thing that's the most important. If you find someone that's great at the most important thing you want them to do, you can probably teach them some of the others, but they won't necessarily be great at them all. So if you have 4 things, they might be great at one and they might be okay at doing 2 other things, right? So that's more how I look at it. So just again, it's no different than hiring employees in the US or in Europe, right? Like not everyone is great at everything. The thing is, a lot of people can learn different things, but generally you always want to play to people's strengths. So I always, when we recruit, we very frequently use the DISC behavior test. And at heyramp.com, you can actually sign up for free and get free DISC test for anyone you're interviewing and so on. But we very frequently use the DISC behavior test just to have a simple way of understanding people's natural strengths and weaknesses. So with some SEO, for example, you want people who are very detail-oriented. Now, hiring anyone and expecting them to be detail-oriented is just naive, right? So some people, when they look at a spreadsheet with 20 numbers, they get dizzy, right? So if you're needing a person who is very detail-oriented, hire for someone who is natural detail-oriented person. If you're hiring, let's say sometimes you need a link builder, and maybe the focus isn't detail, but maybe the focus is volume and it's getting results. Well, typically that's a different type of person, right? So you want to hire for the kind of person. Actually, so when I go to conferences, which I do a lot, sometimes I see SEO companies being sponsors. And one of the things is often you have these SEOs sitting behind a sponsor booth and they're kind of like hiding. They're like, oh, don't talk to me, don't talk to me. I hate talking to humans. Now, if you're going to an event and you're bringing people from your business, you probably want to bring people who are more extroverted, right? So again, all roles, all different skills kind of require, like you have different types of personalities, and you want to find people that kind of matches what it is you're trying to hire for. That's how you get the best bang for buck in general. It's how you're most likely that the person is going to succeed in the role. And fundamentally, from a sort of management standpoint, you're going to have a significantly easier ride in managing the individual.
Where can people follow you?
So Mads Singers everywhere. So only person in the world with that name. And yeah, social media, madssingers.com. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, all of this good stuff. So follow me. Yeah, message me. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or anything at all you want to know about outsourcing. And you can also check out aristosourcing.com, which is the outsourcing company. And yeah, always love helping people.
I would like to thank Mads for the interview. People watching can like, comment, share, subscribe and whatever else you do to videos if you're watching in the future. If you don't find notifications annoying, you can turn notifications on.